Hello, everybody. I would love to ask you all to say hi in the chat so I know you can all hear me. And because it's really weird to talk to a screen and not have any interaction of people here. Yay, loud and clear. Good. Hi, everybody. So, welcome to my very first session at this great event. So, my session is the importance of basics of the basics, and we're going to talk about some different things today. But first of all, before I start, I would like to say, so hi, I'm Furrrocious. My pronouns are she or her. Um, Please contact me in the chat if you have any questions. This is new to me, so I might make some mistakes or might miss your questions, but there's some people in the background helping me out, so I'm sure it will be fine. Also, if you need translations, there's a translation code on the top of your screen. If you can type that into your Microsoft Translate, you'll be able to read along in the language of choice. And let me know if that doesn't work out, or you can also reach out in the Facebook group to the Rule 56 people that are there to stand by and help out with any questions. So let's get started. So the things we're going to be talking about today is first we're going to do some introductions, and then I'm going to explain a little bit about why I wanted to do this session with you all and why I think that the basics are so incredibly important when we're coaching roller derby. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how we're going to incorporate those basics in our training plans and how to work with athletes to really make sure we incorporate those basics in our training. So to start out, um, I would like to introduce myself a little bit longer. So my name is Furrrocious, and I've been skating with Amsterdam Roller Derby since January 2010. So it's almost 9 years, which is insane. And last season, I've also been skating with Bear City Roller Derby, which has been really awesome. I've been coaching I started pretty early on because basically we didn't, we were one of those leagues that didn't really have anybody in our league that knew everything, or so everybody kind of started coaching, and I really got the hang of it and started coaching our B team, coaching different boot camps, and yeah, I've been doing lots of coaching, especially for the last like 4 or 5 years. So I'm really excited to share some knowledge with you all today, and yeah. So I want to hear about you guys. I want to know who is here listening and interacting, I hope. So we have a poll. So if you are not on a mobile device, you will not have to switch screens. If you are on a mobile device, you're going to have to switch screens, I believe. And if you could fill out these few short questions, then I'll have an idea of who is on the other side of this recording. So if you take a second to fill in those questions, that would be great. I'm just gonna give you all a longer to make sure that everybody has had time to answer. All right, let's see those answers. So we have a lot of Europeans in the house today and some people from North America. So that's awesome. Welcome, everybody. Um, okay, so I found it really interesting to ask y'all like how long you've been involved in Derby and such, just because I want to know kind of like what is the audience I'm talking to. So most of you at least have been longer in Derby than a few years, some a very long time. And coaching is very different. So for some of you, some of the stuff I'm going to be telling is very logical or very like you might kind of already know or understand or whatever. And for others, it might be very new, like people who only started coaching in the last few years. It might be a little bit more new or not. I don't know. But we're going to see. We're going to go together and figure this one out. Okay, cool. So let me see if I can figure this out to go back to this. So if you have any questions at any point, I'd like you to just reach out through the chat. Okay, I'd love to have this be interactive. So make sure to just speak up, and if there's anything you want to know, you can do that. If you just want to tell me how you are feeling about something, you can also do that by clicking this thingy in the bottom somewhere, and you can say raise hand if you want to ask a question, or like um, basically it's kind of like an emoji, like whatever button. You can use it. Be interactive. All right, so let's move on. So why do we need to have this session? Um, I feel like a lot of times within roller derby, especially going to boot camps and coaching boot camps, I see that there's a lot of people that will want to learn the intermediate levels or the advanced levels, but they don't actually have all the building blocks or all the basic skills they need in order to participate in those things. And I feel like sometimes within derby, we don't always coach um, those basic building blocks that much, or I at least see that people think they're already somewhere where they're maybe not completely ready yet. So I think a lot of that lies with also how we coach within our own leagues and how we build up our athletes, and how we coach them in understanding and managing expectations. So we're going to talk about that a little later. So why are those basics so important? Um, I mean, I picked these pictures because I thought it was very funny. Like the first pictures, the basic proper derby form and how we all need to be low, and everybody always gets told get lower. And then on the other hand, you have these amazing skaters that are getting low, but it's in such a different way, and it shows like it's not just getting low is not just our basic skill that we need to learn. No, it's about a lot more what's going on to get to that point of activity. So I just wanted to do another little poll with you guys about about these things. Like, how many of you have ever found yourself screaming at athletes going, get lower? Like, I feel like that's something that we scream so much in Derby, um, as it's one of those kind of like standard things that we yell almost. So I just wanted to have a little check. So to fill out the poll again, make sure if you're on a mobile device to swipe to that other screen. But have you ever caught yourself yelling or screaming or telling your athletes during a game, like, get lower, out of sheer desperation because you can see that they need to get there and they're not doing something they're supposed to do? I don't know. I feel like I used to yell it all the time. And my other question that I wanted to ask you guys is, have you ever felt like you, as a coach, are asking something from your athletes that they cannot actually do? And I would love to hear your answers. I'm going to give you a minute to answer that. Not even a minute. It's not going to take that long, I think. Feel like I should have a poll waiting song. All right. Thank you all for participating. All right. So at least some of you have definitely know what this is like, right? The yelling of the get lower, or it can be anything else. But I feel like sometimes it's almost like a desperation of like, we're gonna scream something that makes them actually get lower, and it's not actually gonna work during the game. But yeah. And have you ever felt like you as a coach are asking something from your athletes that they cannot actually do? So 75% of you said yes. Um, Good. You're gonna enjoy this session then, because I feel like it's kind of like it's gonna link into stuff that you um, are gonna recognize, I think. So while I was doing some research on this topic, I found this quote that I kind of thought was fitting sometimes for these situations, which is, athletes do not fail because their skill level is poor. They fail because their ability to perform the skill in competition conditions is poor, and that's a coaching issue. So it's kind of it's a kind of a harsh, like, we're going to put this quote out there. Um, I would totally formulate it a little bit more positive and say, and that's something coaches can work on. But what I liked about this quote is that I feel like we do this constantly with our skaters. And our skaters do this themselves as well. Like, we're trying to reach for something that we don't actually have the skill level to get to, And so we're actually setting ourselves up to fail because it's not that, it's not that we can't play roller derby, it's we can't actually do that because we don't have the skill level for it. So I just thought that that was I don't know, a quote that resonated with what I was talking about. So I thought I'd share it with you. So how are we going to change this? How are we going to make sure that we do better and that our athletes are going to be set up for success? So the first thing that I think as coaches that we can do is to make sure that we're analyzing the skills that we want to teach. So this goes for two things, in my opinion. So first of all, if we're talking about skill, we can talk about a skill like a plow stop, but we can also talk about a skill being a tripod or being a certain strategy. And in order to coach the last part, so in order to be able to coach a certain strategy or a certain move that is a teamwork move or that is, a move that they would do in an actual game scenario, it means they need certain skills in order to get there. And for both of those, we need to be able to train those um, separately. So you can have a training plan to train a certain skill, and then you can have a training plan on how are you going to implement those skills in a certain a strategic skill set or teamwork skill set. So whatever I'm talking about is basically on those two, and I'll go through it and try to explain it in a way where that makes sense. And if I don't make sense, you're going to have to let me know in the chat box that is down there. So one of the things I mean with analyze is when you as a coach are thinking like, I want our wall to work in a tripod formation, and I want them to be able to catch a jammer on high speed and not move 20 feet, right? If that's something that you want to achieve and you want to be able to cover the track with that tripod, so that means there's a lot of different basic skills involved that they will need in order to succeed. So one of the things I see quite a lot is that, for instance, in that tripod scenario, they will put somebody that is the bracer that can't actually skate backwards very well. Like that's one of those moments where I go, okay, well these are some building blocks and some really good basic skills that people need to be able to build in order to actually perform what we're asking them to perform. So these are the moments where you need to analyze what are the skills that are needed in order to perform the strategy or derby related skill that you want them to perform. And once you've analyzed that, you can then work on to, building a training plan on how are you going to get there. So to analyze those skills, I feel like one of the things that we sometimes have trouble with is, or not have trouble with, but that we kind of skip, um, is we kind of go from where we go to basic training and we have, a plow stop. Let's just stay with the plow stop. And we have a plow stop, and somebody can perform a plow stop. They've passed their minimums. Yay, they can plow. Cool. They can do one-on-one blocking, and they've practiced their plow there. So it should be good enough. And then we move into this tripod. Let's stick with that example. And all of a sudden, they don't only have to plow on when they're getting impact. They also need to be able to then quickly switch from a braking position to a lateral position and then back to a braking position. They need to engage all of their muscles in order to take that hard impact. And there's all these different kind of building blocks that we need to be aware that need to be trained in order to do that other skill, right? So when we take that analyzation of what we actually want to teach and we go into building a training plan, then it's really important that we look at how do they master this skill and how do we make sure that they're actually ready for what we're asking from them in a competition setting. So I will go into this in a little bit and I'll have a schedule or like a scheme for you guys on how you can work on that. But I wanted to make sure that I go on with this. So after you've got that building plan or the training plan, you always need to reassess, right? And then adjust your plan. And that's something that sometimes I feel we forget, and then we just do the same thing for a very long time, and it might actually, it might need changing or it might need adjusting. So making sure you get into that cycle as a coach for yourself and making sure that when you're trying to do this new skill and you set out this training plan, you also work on like, where's my cycle? Where do I need to reassess and adjust the plan before you go into this new thing? All right. So does anybody have anything to add, to say, to wave? It's really weird to talk to a screen. So if you want to put anything in that chat box, I'll be happy to see that you're all alive and happy and listening. Cool. All right. So I found this table or seven. It's called Seven Steps for Mastering a Skill, and it's a process scheme, whatever. I don't know how you say that in English, but it's an overview of how to master skills within sports. And it's been published online by WG Coaching, and it's about sports in general. It's definitely something you can look up more. They have some interesting views on it, and what I like is that it really breaks down what kind of skills, like when do you know a skill and how do you build up to actual performance level. So I thought it was interesting because it asks or it shows you a couple of things. So it shows you the critical coaching question, like what we're going to run through this step by step in a minute, but and then the learning driver. So if it's athlete driven or coach driven, and the coach's focus on it, and then the athlete's level of understanding, and then the practice experience. So to go to the first one. So what happens a lot, I feel, in sports in general, but definitely in roller derby, is that we kind of stick to that first base level where it's we're performing a skill. So let's go back to that plow stop. We can do the plow stop. Can the athlete perform this plow stop? Yes. Yes, we can. You know, the coach just looked at it, the coach has instructed us, we know what to do, we've given feedback, and we can be like, yep, okay, kind of like the minimum skills, it's checked off, you can do that, cool. You know, it's kind of basic, but you can do it. And then we go to that second level where you're more of like, okay, you can perform it better and better, you can perform it pretty well. So I'm just going to run through this, by the way, with you all, and then I'll go back to it a little bit to explain a little bit more on different things. But bear with me. So those are the first two steps, right? And that's kind of where I feel like we're kind of stuck sometimes. And then we jump all the way to seven, where it's like, and now you perform it in a game. Hey. And it's not like we don't train it in between, but we don't actually focus on what the different steps are per se in that basic skill in order for that basic skill to be ready for competition or like for a game. So if you would run through the schedule with, let's say, the plow stop, so the third and fourth step are performed very well at speed, right? This is probably something we do. We all make sure to go from that plow stop to train it under higher speed, and to make sure that people can plow, you know, at a higher speed and they know how to still stand and keep their core tight and all that kind of stuff. And then there's one that I feel like sometimes we don't do as much, and that is perform the skill very well at speed and under fatigue. Okay, so this is where they talk about really training the skills under the circumstances that they're going to be experienced. So if we're talking about fatigue in roller derby, we're really talking about, you know, those jams where you're actually tired, your body can't move, right? So we want to make sure that when we're training certain skills, even if it's something as easy as a plow stop, to make sure you do it in all these different kinds of settings so people are actually able to still perform that same skill when we're doing this in like a game scenario type thing. So they say that like the questions are asking, right? So can the athlete perform the skill in training practices with similar competition conditions? So if we think of that of a plow stop, obviously, you know, you could make this into everything, anything longer than obviously an hour, because a game is an hour. So let's just make sure that we you overtrain that. Okay, so you and I, with overtrain, I just mean you go beyond the time limit that they would normally have to do it. So if we do, for instance, if we're working on like a derby set skill or even a jammer or a blocker's endurance, you want to make sure that those skills are trained longer than the time that would be needed in a game. So let's say for endurance, you want to make sure if you have a 2 minute jam, you would want to have that maybe make it 3 minutes. right? Or 4 minutes. So you stretch it up so when they actually have to perform in those 2 minutes, they're not going to be fatigued because they're actually used to training longer. Does that make sense? I guess I shouldn't be asking you guys that because you're on the other side of my screen, but yes. Um, so what I also feel is that when we're moving on from somebody who knows a skill to getting them to up their skill and perform it very well, you want to really make sure that we're working together. So the coach and the athlete are working together and making that skill better and better, which means that we as coaches are setting the conditions in which the athlete can perform better. So in the way the skater can, learn those skills under fatigue and all that. But we want to make sure sorry, I'm a little bit sick, by the way, so I'm going to be coughing a little bit. I'm sorry. So we really want to make sure that we also give them feedback on those basic skills while we're training them. Okay, so if we're working specifically on doing that plow stop or um, under like certain conditions, we want to make sure that we're really pushing them to do the right thing. So if their form is not correct, we want to make sure we give them those form corrections. And we want to make sure that we are communicating on what that basic skill is that they're trying to make better. We'll talk a little bit more about communication with athletes and stuff at the end of this. So I'm not going to go into that all too deep, but yeah. So if we're talking about that plow stop, I would definitely say like, working on making it better is really like making sure you're, for instance, setting certain times in which they have to do, or what I really like is when you're trying to get them to get up speed, and then also plowing small, so precision. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. So for speed, for instance, and control, you could set it where they would have to start stopping at the jammer line and being stopped within 5 feet or be stopped within 20 feet or whatever fits your athlete obviously in their level, but you really want to make sure that they're working on getting that as controlled as they can in the thing you're trying to work on with them. So if it's speed, then you can do that. Or if it's, for instance, making a plow stop smaller, you can give them cones and they need to make sure they plow within that. So there's all kinds of things that you as a coach can facilitate to make that better. But to start with that, obviously, you need to make sure you analyze what the problem is, right? So what to make sure that is there problem speed or is there problem fatigue or like precision, and then you can give them the you can facilitate their training in that. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So that's the how to do it and how not to do it. So make sure you give them that feedback, and then there's some explanation on tough training. So that's the training techniques on their fatigue. You can read up about all of that online. I don't have that kind of experience on that specific thing, so I'm not gonna tell you that because I don't know all the things. I just know it more in a derby related context. All right. So if we move on to step number 5. So step number 5 is perform very well at speed under fatigue and under pressure. Okay, so these are the moments where we want to make sure if you're talking about a derby related skill like a plow stop, to make sure that there's also if they get so this is two types of pressure in derby, right? It's the pressure of like the game scenario, so making sure that they can do it under pressure. So for instance, on a whistle and that kind of stuff. But it's also the way I would translate it for us, it's also about the actual pressure in the derby situation, like for instance, plow when they get pushed, right? So it's you can read this as different things, but it's definitely about making sure they can perform, not just plow whenever you want, but make sure you plow on the whistle in this moment with this speed for so long. Does that make sense? Cool. Let me see, I get the right one. All right. So step number 6 is to perform very well at speed, under fatigue, and under pressure constantly. Okay. So this is a little bit different, maybe than what I just said. I guess is on like a whistle and stuff. I find that already like constantly. It can be constantly for 2 minutes where somebody's whistling at you. But you'd have to translate this to whatever thing you're practicing. What this really is about is to make sure that the skill you're asking them to do is trained up on all those different levels. So it's not just can you do it, but can you do it under speed? Can you do it under fatigue? Can you do it under pressure? Can you do it under constant pressure? And then the last one is performing very well at speed, under fatigue, and under pressure, constantly in competition conditions. So we all know that roller derby is kind of hectic during a game, and like especially if you're coaching more intermediate or beginner skaters, it can sometimes, that first or second or even third game, and some people have it forever, but those games can bring all kinds of stress with them, nerves. It can be, friends are in the audience and this is so exciting. Or, with higher level freaking skaters, I mean, you're going to be on TV. Like, there's all kinds of pressure, right? Or you want to win the Hydra. Like, there's pressure. There's pressure when we play roller derby, no matter at what level. And for a skater to really perform um, well under these conditions and make sure that they're training to win, um, if that's what they want, right? But let's say they are, then they want to be able to perform their skill level in a way that they could perform it, or in a way that's successful, right? And in order to do that, all these conditions that they are skating in, obviously you can't mimic all of that in a training situation in the sense of like the craziness, the sound, the people, blah, blah, blah. You can't really control that in your all of your coaching, but you can definitely make sure that the skill itself is performed in a way where they're used to, or is practiced in a way that would be asked from them in game conditions. So the whole practice as you play, and making sure you put the same type of conditions out there is coming from that. Because anybody who's been coaching for a longer period of time, you will know that when you can watch your athletes and you're like, they can do this in practice. Why can't they do this in the game? Right? That comes a lot from making sure that people are actually have not just a skill set, but they need to have it trained under those same conditions in order to then be able to perform. Which means that when we say practice as you play, you want to make sure, that that person that has to plow in that wall is being pushed just as hard during practice as they are during a game. You don't want to be surprised during a game. So what is interesting under these parts is that the learning drive on this level is really athlete driven. So we need to really be aware that it's their that they are very aware of what their skill set is. They feel comfortable in doing this. They know they can do this, and that will lead them to success. So and our focus is to really make sure that we understand exactly where they are and that we then know what we can and cannot ask from them. And this comes down to the poll question, about have you ever asked an athlete something that you weren't sure they could perform. If we go through this kind of steps with our athletes, then we'll be very aware of what we can and cannot ask from them at that moment, and they should also be very aware of what they can and cannot do. And that's hopefully then making sure we're setting them up to succeed. Um, with the athlete's level of understanding, it's the why to do it, when not to do it, and when to do it. So I personally kind of think that that level of understanding should be trained in the part below that. I don't know if that's exactly how this model works, but I would definitely say that when we're practicing, under like the conditions that we want to play under as well, then it's very important with our skill set in derby that the athletes have an understanding of why they're doing something and why they're not, and when they should use something and when they shouldn't. So they can really experience that what they're saying, like the problem solving and decision making process. They can do that themselves. Like they have the ability to understand, like this is what I need right now, and this is when I need to plow, or this is when I need to skate, or whatever. So that decision making process should be in there. So I'm going to go back to the first one because I want to talk a little bit more about like a derby-like skill. So a strategy, or let's go just back to that tripod. Okay, let's use it as an example. So if we use the same 7 steps for mastering that skill, obviously we need to make sure that when we're analyzing what the skills are and that we've looked at all the different skills that are needed. So they need to understand, muscle engagement. They need to be able to plow. They need to be able to move laterally. They need to be able to skate backwards in case they're in the bracing position. There's all these things they need to do, right? And those are all those basic skills and building blocks that we need to be aware of. So when we go into this, when we're asking this from them, we can still be in the very low levels of, they can maybe they can perform it, but they're not like the best at it yet, right? And you want to build that up. So we want to make sure that when we're asking that from them, they have an idea of what we're asking them and they have an idea of what they can do. So if you build this into a training plan, that means you might want to start your training with doing the plow stops, doing some muscle engagement, doing some one-on-one contact so they get a feel of the pressure, um, doing some doing some lateral work, doing some backward skating. So you can quickly run through all of those skills, making sure everybody's like, oh yeah, this is the basic skill I'm using, and before you actually go into that tripod work. So I notice kind of maybe for most of you, this is like super general, but I feel like a lot of times I still see it within trainings of some leagues that they don't have that build up and they immediately go, okay, let's go do some tripods. And then I can just see that people are forgetting to engage or people are forgetting to plow or they're forgetting to get like if we run through those skills before we get into that, we are actually setting them up to succeed and we can explain to them like why these basic skills are super important before we move into the actual thing what you want from them. And so making sure that they understand what is asked from them and making sure that we're setting this goal of this is what we're going to be working towards and this is why we're doing this before will really help. It will also really help when you're coaching them through the skill to be able to give them form corrections based on those basic skill building blocks. Okay, so you can be like, don't forget, we were going to engage, or don't forget to use those laterals because we just practiced them and I know you can do them. Now you just want to get them into this skill set, basically, or this strategy, or this tripod, or whatever thing you're practicing. So again, you can just run through this schedule with the tripod, for instance, in mind, um, where you are focusing really on um, like making sure that there's the basic level of it instead of trying to all of a sudden immediately be able, to stop Scald Eagle. Like, right, we're not going to all immediately be able to stop Scald Eagle. We're going to have to make sure that we actually, work through these different levels first. So this is where, you want to think about how are we going to train this. So maybe have your jammers go at 70%, right? Have them only go to the middle first before they move laterally. Those are the kind of things, and again, conditions that you as a coach can control to make sure that these basics are, that it's really built up in a way where it makes sense. And we're not expecting them immediately to be able to perform stuff at like game level, right? So I think that these are steps that we sometimes skip over because we're just really excited and we're like, oh, you can do it. Let's just do it. And I think that there's 6 steps between practicing a new skill and practice as you play, right? I want to practice as we play, but we want to make sure that when we practice as we play, we have the skaters have the building blocks to do that, and they feel comfortable and confident to do it. Because don't forget, with roller derby, this is a full contact sport, making it especially important for people to feel confident in their skills when they are, when they're getting physically into it, basically. All right. So like I said, so let's say that we keep with the tripod. So for the tripod, in those first 2 steps, you're really going to focus on like making sure that, for instance, you first nail the impact. Okay. So you can just stand there as a tripod, standing still, jammer's coming from 20 feet, and it's only going to hit the middle. So that moment, your skaters can really focus on a few basics. They can focus on getting low with a plow, right, to take that impact, and they can really focus on their muscle engagement. So if we take that as a separate thing, then you can then work on like making sure the jammer starts moving 10 feet before they hit the wall. So the wall really needs to focus on making sure that they're tracking the jammer. And then when you've separated out all those building blocks or all those basics in this skill, which is those different parts of it, then you can put them all together. And then you can say, um, let's say, and then basically those are all the things you need to do in the first two steps, right? And then once they can actually do the whole thing, so they can catch a jammer, they can track them, they can take the impact, and they can keep them behind them while the jammer is moving or whatever. You can then move on to like steps 3 and 4, where we're working on speed. And so you can start it at 50%, build it up 70% to obviously 100. And then also under fatigue. So again, the 4 minute jams, right? It's fun. Or like whichever length you want to build it up to. But make sure you're building it up. Okay, so make sure you give the athletes the understanding of we're building this up. So this time we're doing it for a minute straight. And then this time we're going to be doing it for 2 minutes. And this time we're going to be doing it for 3 minutes. And give people that building the building blocks basically. Um, And then obviously the last one, the last one, it's not the last one, but number 5 would perform very well at speed, under fatigue, and under pressure would really be when you're putting that tripod into an actual jam scenario, right? That's when the pressure is on because that's when their tripod is being attacked and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, again, you can build that up going from making sure it's a tripod with one offense or making sure that it's a tripod with two, and then build that up until you're with a full-on jam, right? And make sure that the pressure conditions are all there. You're doing it under speed. You're doing it for so full on 100%, and then you're doing it for a longer period of time. So let's say for 3, 4 minutes, whatever. Um, and then the last one would be for me to add on to that is that would be also the moment where you really want to know that people know and make the decisions they need to make. So for instance, in the tripod, if you've taught them to, let go of the arms when they're going to a line, or that kind of stuff, you want to make sure that the decision making process and they know what to do, when to do it, how to do it. You would already want to see that in that level, if you ask me. So it's performed very well at speed, under fatigue, and under pressure consistently. So you kind of want to see this as when you're in a scrimmage scenario, at that moment, you want them to perform exactly in a way that you would want them to perform at a game. Or if you turn it around, the way they're going to perform there, you want them to do it so realistically, so much practice as you play, that you can see what they would probably perform like in a game as well, which is and then obviously you want them to be able to be successful when they're in a game scenario and be able to feel confident and feel like they've really mastered the skills needed and the building blocks to work on that. So does this make sense, everybody? Do people have questions on this topic or on this 7-step stuff or on anything I'm saying? I'm trying to give you a second to actually type. Oh, on the cool. Okay, I'm glad it's making sense. That's good. I also kind of find it always hard with these sessions because I know I'm not like saying new things per se, but it's I hope it's useful and helps. Cool. Oh, I see somebody still typing. Um, it's good to be reminded. Yes, it is. Okay, so in all of this, when I talk to coaches about what is the biggest problems with these things, is the actual working with athletes themselves, right? So what is so hard on working with athletes in roller derby is that, we're all here as volunteers. Nobody is actually, mostly nobody is getting paid or, we're doing this from our because we love the sport, because we want to be part of it. Everybody has their own intrinsic reasons on why we want to do it. And at the same time, um, once you're in a coaching role, you are there for a reason, right? We're there to help athletes become better. We're helping athletes to become better skaters, and have a goal that they're working towards, you want to help them get there, right? And then you're also not working with athletes individually, but you're also working with an athletes in a team setting. So there's a lot that goes on in how we coach athletes, and therefore I think it's very important to have a few moments to look at and talk about communications, or communication, and then feedback, managing expectations, and different ways of learning how to support them. So that I'm just going to run through these. I don't have any more like fancy sheets or anything or slides. I'm just going to talk through this. So on communications, I think this is really important, especially I hear this a lot with coaches who are coaching skaters that might be better skaters than they are. Or, for instance, coaches who coach skaters and aren't a skater themselves. Like that kind of stuff that gives dynamics, sometimes within the relationship between a coach and a skater, that is really important to be aware of, and also to recognize it within your relationship with the athletes. Um, so what I find really important when we're talking about coaching and coaching about basics is to really understand what we're asking from them. So that means that when we're talking about analyzing the skill we're trying to teach, we really nail down like what is it that what they need to be doing. So when we're watching them, we can actually look at what is it in their basic skills that they're missing that makes them not actually perform the for instance, the tripod, in the way that I want them to, or in the way they want them themselves to. So, for instance, if you watch a tripod drill of some skaters, and you can see one skater is constantly being pushed forward, you can analyze then: is it their plow stop? Are they not plowing? Are they not actually engaging their muscles to be ready for that impact? Like, what is it in their motion that is actually prohibiting them from doing the skill that we're asking them to do? So when we're doing that, when we want to communicate that form correction, we want to make sure that we give them as much as possible, because we're not all, perfect or whatever, but you want to, as much as possible, give them the feedback on specifics through form correction. So you can be like, okay, well, you're doing this right, but you feel like you're being pushed up. Maybe try to adjust your plow stop, or try to sink more into it, or try to engage your muscles, whatever the problem is, and try to figure that out with them. Okay, so you are there as a coach to really help support with that. And even though you can't sometimes do it yourself, that doesn't mean you can't coach it. It doesn't mean you can't see it. Okay, so understanding those basic building blocks of a skill is also, if you don't know it, you can figure it out together. Okay, you can take some skaters, or if you skate yourself, you can figure out like what is it that I'm actually doing, or what is it that we actually need these skaters to do when they do it correctly. So you can look at skaters that can already perform the skill, to ask and figure out what skills or what the basic building blocks are if you don't know. But having that knowledge and understanding, and making sure that you can explain that knowledge and understanding of the skill to the skater, to the athlete themselves, really will help with their learning process of it. Okay, so I hope that, yeah, that makes sense. And so in that, I kind of put in their feedback as well, because I feel like feedback is such a, I'm coming from social work, so I've had the feedback rule sessions so many times in my life. But what I notice in Derby is we're coming from all walks of life, and not everybody has been trained in giving feedback. Um, that's one, right? But then the biggest one is also taking feedback, and like there's also cultural differences with that. Like people can take feedback in a certain way or not, and it's really important as a coach, I feel, to really understand like your own understanding about giving and taking feedback, and being able, if you explain something to somebody and they're like, blah, 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 I don't agree, or blah, 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 or they give you feedback, that you can also understand how to take that feedback, right? Um, but understanding that when we work with athletes, um, how they take feedback, how their learning process works is different for everybody. And it's really important to be able to understand, like, how that works and what you can and cannot do. And also when you're a coach of a team, there's a lot of people. You don't have all that time. So a lot of times being able um, to make different ways of supporting the learning process for your skater. So for instance, working with the buddy system or whatever, all of that, if they can't take feedback from each other, that's going to be a huge issue, right? And then also we need to realize that sometimes skaters are in this adrenaline motion thing, and you give them feedback, and at that moment they just go, "Ah, I don't want to listen to this because I'm in game mode or whatever." So it's really good for us, I think, to think about feedback, to understand, how to give it, how to take it, and be aware that your skaters should also be aware of that process, and if you have any time at any point, which we never have enough time, but if you have any time to make sure in the beginning of your season or halfway through your season to like just have a moment where you talk with your skaters and be like, hey, let's make sure, we give each other feedback and like we're positive and like we make sure that we accept their feedback, blah, 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 and just make sure that you keep bringing that up because I think it's very important. Um, so yeah, managing expectations. Let's make sure we are setting our skaters up to succeed. Okay, so obviously this is all about what I've just been saying about all those different building blocks and making sure it just makes sense and it works on top of each other and it's not like you want them to work really well in a wall and you want them to work really well in a tripod and you need them to do muscle engagement, plowing, and lateral motions. If you've never or like in months have not practiced those single building blocks, it's not going to be as effective. We're not setting them up to success. So make sure that we're really managing that by organizing our trainings well, and at the same time we need to be really honest and open with our team and our skaters on where they are in their own progress. Okay, so you sometimes see these skaters that are trying some skill that or like some strategy or whatever that they don't have the skills to do. Then let's make sure we have open conversations about that. Okay, and for me that means that you can work on setting goals that you can track so they know where they are, but making sure that you can also talk about those basic building blocks for a certain skill, and then explain in the drill or whatever to be like, okay, guys, so this is what we're gonna do, and if you haven't gotten these, if you know you have issues with these skills, make sure to really work on that during the drill, blah blah blah. But managing their expectations, managing that they're not going to be Scald Eagle yet, or whichever skater in the world, is really going to help them to succeed and to make sure that their own goals are the goals they can and want to reach. And I think that's a really important part of it. And I quickly wanted to tap into the different ways of learning and how to support them because we were talking about making sure we're facilitating our trainings and making sure we're facilitating our athletes to reach their goals, right? So when we're talking about training these different skills, I was saying earlier, like you can set the parameters in which people have to stop, right, in order to practice speed and precision. But you can also one of the things I really like to do and how to facilitate the learning process of certain skills and understanding, making them understand what they can or cannot do or why they are having a problem with a certain basic skill in a movement is video. For those who don't use video yet, start tomorrow, today, tonight. Using video in training is so important because when athletes see what you see, you can say stop, play. There's lots of apps and where you can draw and whatever on the video. You can show them exactly where the problem is, where you can see they're not plowing, or where you can see they're not digging in enough or engaging enough, or you can show them where that problem is. What I usually do is there's always this skater that's injured or whatever, or even when you're doing drills and you just have some people left over, or make them in a group where they have an extra person to just have that person video, or making sure you have the video to look at when I'm in specific skills training, I will try to make sure that they can watch it right away, and they can be like, okay, this is your form correction. This is where you need form correction. Blah 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 blah. When it's like skills or drills or scrimmage, I might put it up after because I can't really show them constantly in between jams. But those are things that you can really think about, like how can I help facilitate their learning process better, and how can I really support them in the different ways there are different ways of learning. So for some people, it might be really useful to see it themselves. For some, it might be really useful if you just break down exactly which basic skills they're missing. Um, it's different for everybody, and it's really important. I feel like with all of this, the communication, the feedback, the managing of the expectations, is to get to know your athletes as much as you can, and ask them as well, like what do they need, what do they feel like works for them or whatever. So um, yeah. So I was supposed to keep about 10 minutes open for questions. And it's about 8 minutes. So I'm gonna open that up for questions. And I did put up my email address in case you have any further questions after the seminar or you want information about coaching or whatever, you can always email me. Also, I would really like to thank my sponsor, Rollline, for sponsoring this session. They are amazing that they're supporting the growth of this sport in this way because it's about coaching specifically and not just about skating. And I think that's really cool. So that was my shout out. Okay, Treble is saying I need to link to your video in my class. Okay, well you can. It's cool. I'm cool with whatever. So if anybody else has any kind of questions, this is the time to ask whatever you want. I hope this was useful. You can also share if you found this useful. I read something about made me think about session planning. So yes, be sure to go through those steps, analyze and plan. It's so important, and then reassess. Yeah, work on those training plans. I see some people typing, so I'm gonna give them time to type and ask stuff. Let's see how people are and I don't know what else to say. I could sing y'all a song. Oh yeah, I can tell you about my class on Sunday morning, or it might actually be in the middle of the night if you're somewhere else in the world. But Sunday morning, I have a class on beginner and intermediate strategies, and it's going to be really cool. What would be the time frame you'd set up for the 7 steps? Kevin, that's a great question. Um, Unfortunately, there's not one easy answer because this is really going to depend on the skill and on the skill on the skill level, obviously. So how quick and on the athlete, so how quickly are they going to learn, etc. Um, I do think that for certain skills, we need longer than we sometimes take. So, for instance, if we're trying to learn a certain skill, uh, like a tripod, like a good running tripod formation with like different things, so being able to deal with offense, blah blah blah. I would take months for that. That doesn't mean that it can't already be tried in between, right? That can't doesn't mean you can't ever play games or whatever, but it does mean that you know and you track where you are and where your problems are throughout that time. So personally, I think you shouldn't be working on too many different skills at the same time, depending obviously on how much training time you have. I hope that helps. Mm. Do you have suggestions for encouraging skaters that are struggling with the basics to keep them motivated and not give up? Yes, that's a good one. So I think my biggest suggestion with that is to really make sure that skaters are owners um, to their own progress. So that means to make sure they set really clear goals, and it's really on us, I think, as coaches to make sure that we facilitate those trying to get those goals, right? So, for instance, if to go back to the plow, if we're working on like precision and speed, and we want to make sure that they can stop at a high speed and do that really with precision and compact and tightness or whatever, you can work on those like start stopping at the jammer line and take the 5, 10, 20, whatever feet, and then bring that closer and closer and closer every time. Um, Also, you can obviously make sure that they still do fun stuff, right? It's not like, let's go basics all the time and it's just basics, right? But we want to make sure that when we're giving them something fun to do, which basically is always derby scenario stuff, right? That's fun because that's why we're here. You want to make sure that it's stuff they can actually perform. And so, you know, when you're yeah, so I think it's really important to make sure you set goals and you're really clear with them on what they can and cannot do to make sure to keep them motivated to make sure they're reaching those goals and they can tick it off. Yes, I've gotten there. Yes, this time I stopped within 10 feet. Okay, next month I want to be able to stop at 5 feet. To give them that actual progress. And plow steps are fun. I agree. Okay, how do you deal with multiple skill levels in the same group? I think I've given classes on that and stuff like EROC and EDC for like the past, I don't know, 3, 4 years. Like I feel this is a constant problem in Derby, and especially because we have limited time and space to work with in our training schedules. So, for instance, in Amsterdam, we run a league training that is based on skills. So what I do in those sessions is I usually make them work, and we have fresh meat in there as well. So we have everything from fresh meat to our competitive A-team skaters. So it's definitely multiple skills levels in one group on those sessions. And what I make sure to do is I really break down to what the skills that we're going to be working on, and for the A teamers or B teamers, the skill level might start here or here. And then for the freshies, it might be the very basic of that skill level, right? So I adjust my training plan to what the things are that people can handle. When we're talking about more derby related skills, so for instance, a tripod, it gets harder when we have the multiple skill levels. But what I do is I make sure that we're really talking through what the focus is of what we're doing. So if I have a tripod of people who, just pass their minimum, somebody from the B team and somebody from the A team in one group together, I will make sure that the person from the A team and B team are getting that they're playing with somebody who has lesser experience, and so they're going to have to adjust. But then I will tell them which basic skills I really want them to focus on so they are nailing that. Like I give them goals within their own drills to make sure that they have something to strive for and they have something to achieve. For instance, any skater at all time can always get lower, right? That was the thing. So for instance, in those settings, you can really be like, okay, well, push yourself, try and really get to that perfect stance and try to find your really good muscle engagement or focus on your communication. So you're really trying to make sure that, yeah, it's adjusted to whoever yeah, whoever's doing what. Okay. I am getting a message that I need to wrap up. So I also think that that was the last question. So I'm gonna thank you all for being here today and to listening to this session. I would love to hear your feedback. So please let me know what you find of this class and if there's anything you want to talk about more or if there's anything information you need or whatever. Reach out. My email address was on the last page. It's rollerderbyhooligan@gmail.com. And yeah, I wish you all a very great couple of 4 days, and I hope to see some of you on Friday or on Sunday morning. Okay, so bye.